All right, I'm Filip. I work at Pure. Our product is called Portworx Data Services. And I'm actually not going to go super deep into any like specific tooling here. And I'm gonna stay more on the boundary between.
Give me a second.
Yeah.
You are not showing your screen.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was sharing. So share. It doesn't let me share, so somebody is probably sharing.
No. No.
Okay, so let's stay on the window. I might switch away from the window at some point. But...
Yeah, right now you can see.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay more on the boundary between like Flux and Git and customizations. And the way you can think about this is it's actually gonna be like a story of how we built a shittier version of Argo CD with like a terrible UI or just no UI. So like the fancy stuff that you've seen, there will be some analogies here, but they will all be like worse and uglier. So I will talk about, just like how Flux rolls out changes into environments, stuff you've already seen, just like to get on the same page. And then I'm actually going to focus more on, like the structure of the repos. I've seen some questions on the talks before, like how do you differentiate between environments and stuff like that? How do you promote things? So I'm going to try to address some of those things. And and then how we actually figure out how things might change before they actually change. So just like if you have a PR coming in, the same way you would, just like besides the code change, like how is it actually going to affect the clusters? Just to start some context, like the environment that we built this in, we are building a product. It's a SaaS where people are connecting their clusters to our control planes, and then we manage some databases or in general stateful services on their clusters. So we call it database as a service. And the user clusters, they're not really relevant here. We are going to focus just on our own control planes because that's where the GitOps stuff comes in. And just a disclaimer that we are a standalone team, but we are primarily software engineers building a product. We're not like infra engineers or like DevOps focused guys. So a lot of the stuff you will see is just like us trying to learn these tools and then probably getting it wrong a little, but just to see like what we ended up with. And the infra we kind of play with nowadays it fluctuates between like a few dozen clusters. Most of them are just development instances for experimentation. And then of course, like the environment clusters, a few of each stage. And some like lightweight variants of various stages, stuff like that. And so less fancy than what you've seen before, but the same principle. We have a Terraform repo, which forms like the hardware basically, and then it deploys Flux, not Argo, but Flux, but the philosophy. Flux actually holds the definitions for the actual applications, the internals of the cluster, not necessarily just the applications. And and then all of these definitions live in a single repo, but this repo has to be able to separate a few different types of clusters. So not just like, development, staging, production, all of that. So just like some few tenets that we try to stick to, not always successfully maybe, but first of all, like and these are all kind of synonymous in a way. They're just different perspectives on the same thing. But we don't, we don't treat clusters as something special life for a year, so we can't afford to bring it. We want to be able to just spin up clusters on demand and turn them down and get them to a predictable, repeatable state, which is the second point, just saying the same thing again. So basically the way to achieve this is just have have everything defined as code, stuff everybody here probably agrees with. And then just like some minor details here is that over time, we've kind of started seeing tendencies for some like configuration leaks where the dependencies of one repo would have to be like injected from other repos. And it can get messy if like multiple repos have responsibility over management of like the same resource. So we try to minimize the amount of explicitly if this does happen, and like be careful about this. Yeah, and of course, like we want to avoid manual interventions on the environment. So we don't want to like manually go into the clusters and start modifying deployments. So everything should be code defined. And this even goes for like stuff like if you want to run a job on the cluster or just like run some, let's say, data migration, we always try to define those as code, as Kubernetes jobs, for example, so that you can get the same results repeatably without manual operators. All right, so the first part, how does Flux roll out changes into Flux? This is going to be like nothing new, but just to get us on the same page. Flux watches the repo. It's pointed at a specific, it's called a Flux, it's actually called a Flux customization. So it kind of clashes with the like standard customization. So we just call them like profiles to differentiate this. It's also pointed at a specific branch of that repo. And this like combination determines how the cluster is actually going to look like. So branch plus profile file end up determining the end state. And yeah, like we've seen that Git operations on the repo should be automatically reconciled to the cluster. And then we have these questions. How to actually have a single repo, but multiple different variants of those environments. So actually kind of started with, and we still have this, but I actually think this model is problematic from an operational standpoint. We have basically a linear history, but with multiple branches. And so these branches end up acting as like pointers on the same Git history. The thing we achieve with this is like an intrinsic time delay where we just like keep shifting the branches along the history. So staging can be a few commits behind. Like you can see that this is kind of inflexible. You can just like choose to promote parts and not others. So we are actively trying to get away from this. But we also don't want to have like branch per environment anymore, because then you get into like merge conflicts, and then you might have some configuration drift without knowing it when you yeah, I mean, this is like a whole topic for a separate talk, but you end up without it. So yeah, and then we have like a CI branch on top of master, sort of. So this keeps resetting itself onto the state of master, and it just keeps collecting the versions of all the services that we like care about inside the infra. So we don't use like the image auto updater stuff that you've seen. And this is basically our custom like primitive auto updater, which keeps collecting the changes, but we like keep explicit control over what actually can get into master. And like, for example, if you want to synchronize the version change with, let's say, like the manifest change, you can just explicitly set the version. And yeah, like it's less automatic, it's more explicit. We kind of wanted that at some point. Yeah, and then some differences between the environments which should stay there and shouldn't be, they should be like orthogonal to the branch promotions. We handle that with customization overlays. So a classic example is like you want to have more replicas on production. So yeah, you just have a permanent overlay inside the production profile overlay, which permanently sets replicas only in production, right? Yep. So now I'm actually I wanted to just like quickly show. I think I need to reshare it to another window. just to get us on the same page, about like what it looks like when you get multiple changes coming into the clusters, right? So I'm gonna have like 3 clusters, but like pointed at the same branch inside that infra repo.
Doesn't work on Steam.
I thought I reshared, but oh, I see. Shit. Oh, it can't access the terminal. Shit. Yeah, I think it's probably company policy that I can't share my terminal, but yeah, but it doesn't let me share the entire screen either. So. Yeah. And try restarting maybe. Oh. Oh. Nice. So, do you think the screen is seeing that now? Ah. Share. Oh yeah, it's probably forbidden by corporate overlords.
And I think that you need to quit your Chrome and allow extra permission.
Shit. Well, I think. Well.
Not sure if it's possible.
Yeah. I think we might have to go without this part. Yeah, but like what you would see, I just like have clusters and I push some commit onto the branch, and then those clusters just change their revision pointer. So that's all I was going to show there. So am I back to the browser at least? Yeah. All right. So, yep. Yeah, and so now more on the environment separation, where this is about like customizations mainly. Yeah, so the repo structure is we have base files, which should be like valid manifests on their own. And then I'll actually go to the overlays first, which are Flux, which are standard customizations, and they reference the bases, whichever so they don't have to reference all of them. They can choose, and yeah, and they can optionally apply some patches. So on the overlay level, that's where you would get those like environment specific overrides, which are persistent, and it's defined as a patch. And then over time, we sort of started seeing a lot of like repetition, and as like primarily like standard code writers, we don't like repetition. So we started looking into a way to extract these common aspects of the configuration, and we found that customization has rolled out kind of experimentally, but it's pretty stable, something called components, which looks pretty much like a customization, but it's like it can be referenced in another customization. It's like more versatile. So into these components, we put like very small, almost like features of the configuration. So it could be something like if you want to just switch on a profiler on the API server, you can just put it into a component, and then you can it's a one-liner to put it into just the actual like dev environment, but not have it in production, stuff like that. Yeah, and then there's this like profile concept, which is just something for Flux, so that Flux knows what to point itself at, and this like collects all the overlays that we define. So yeah, I hope it's visible, but just a example of the tree, how it ends up looking like is it gets pretty big, but it keeps some sort of structure. And yeah, and anyhow, you can see like if I just want to enable a profiler, it's a one-line thing inside a customization. You don't have to like copy paste the patch every single time and have it potentially drift away. Yeah. So yeah, and then like when we have all of this stuff in place, the question then becomes like, how do we actually make sense of it when it starts getting more complex? And the first problem we kind of had with when we had these like linear promotion PRs is, like it's always a massive change. How do we actually figure out what's being changed when we promote stuff? So what we ended up like custom implementing here is when we make these PRs, we know where all those like services or component, I don't want to say components, but like, yeah, services, where they store their versions. And then we go into their repos and we know like which version it was on the first environment and the second. We get the git log from their own repo and we paste it into the PR. We do the same thing for every component that's changing. And yeah, then we get at least some visibility inside these big environment promotions. Because yeah, like we need to have this explicit control, so it's not exactly continuous. Yeah, so this is for like the environment promotions, and then there's like a similar concept when we do just like normal PRs, but into the infra repo. And the question there is like, normally when you just keep updating base manifest, it's pretty clear what's changing. But as we started increasing the complexity inside those repos, it wasn't always like clear to us, like, is this actually going to affect production or no? So we ended up with like a pretty primitive solution, but it at least tells us something. And it's that we generate the customization of each profile on the base branch and the head branch. So the stuff you're trying to merge into the place where you're trying to merge it. We generate the diffs of that thing, and then we again just like paste it into the job output of that like GitHub check. So like these diffs is what we at least have as like a guidance of what might change. Yeah, so I will actually, if it lets me share the let's say VS Code stuff. Yeah. No, I can only share the browser. So I'm gonna stay on the browser.
Maybe you can open in Visual Studio Code.
Yeah, I could open it in the browser, but I kind of have some branches locally, and so I will just push some stuff from local, and then we'll switch to the browser. So yeah, I have like two branches here. So one is just some like yeah, yeah. So I just created some like arbitrary component definition in the repo. It doesn't do anything, but it's just some random code. I referenced it in the dev profile for starters, but now I have one PR or like one branch which actually includes it in the production overlay, and it's just a one-liner, as I said. And then I have like a second branch which does some modification to that component. So it's like changes something in the manifest. And if I go to, this is just my fork, so I'm not pushing into production, don't worry, but I do that anyway. So if I make the PRs from those two branches, yeah. And so first I'm going to include the component in prod. Yeah, whatever. And the second PR will be, I will modify the component, right? Yeah, I had some test PRs before. So okay, so let's have a look at the first PR. It's running some checks, and in a minute, less than a minute, it will generate these customization diffs, and we're gonna see like what the projected change is like. I mean, it's gonna be pretty trivial because this change is trivial, but I guess some of you might appreciate that if you start having more complex changes, like this sometimes becomes helpful, or at least like a sanity check that you're not changing what you don't want to change. And then it's gonna like just paste a comment with, well, let's just stay on the PR. And so like the point of the PR is I'm including something in production. This is a production customization. So the generated changes I see are a few diff lines in production. And if I actually look into what those lines are, you will see that it's the stuff I changed in the component, right? Yeah, so and the other PR it's going into master, where we only have the component on development, and we are changing something about the component. So as we would expect, like we are seeing some change only in development, and it's going to be the same change, but on development. So let's say I will like force merge this, and if now this forced me to like update this PR, right? So we merged that develop the component update into master. So we modified it on development, and now we merge master back in here. And what we would expect to see is that now the production change will contain also the changes we modified in the previous PR. Right? It would have actually been more interesting to first merge this production inclusion, and then the other PR would show it's modifying both of them. But you get the idea, I think. Yeah, so now we have those new values in there. Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty like rudimentary, but it helps when stuff gets. It helps when stuff gets messy. Yeah, and so like one more thing I might show is just like the promotion in action. It's like how it runs. Yeah. Yeah. So like the I guess interesting part is when it has this matrix for collecting all those changes of all those services that have changed. Well, yeah, this fork is kind of broken, so. Yeah, I think GitHub is having some troubles. Looks green now. Or I might have just some outdated definitions on the fork, but we'll see. Yeah, but I mean, even just like the flowchart of the workflow is illustrative enough, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like GitHub is kind of struggling.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to UI in ROC.
Yeah, but it's just shittier. Like,
But do you render even the diff for Helm charts? Like,
yeah, we don't. It's a good idea, I think, but we don't. We don't like. Yeah, we don't render the Helm charts as part of the customization build. But it would be nice to have. Yeah. Like this is actually a thing we've introduced pretty recently, so it's not very mature. But yeah, like as we started, we actually started trying to move away from the branch-based model, and as part of that, we wanted to start having more confidence about what's changing. So it was like a step in preparation. I feel like GitHub is yeah.
How do you create this customization diff? Because when I run kubectl diff -k, it contains also some labels which are not interesting for me.
So right, we have this repo here, right? And so I can just like run customize build into some file, and yeah, it's gonna give me like the whole diff. I'm not sure, like, yeah, so if you run it against the cluster, you will get a bunch of garbage that's on the cluster. So we run it actually just on the static code that's inside the repo. We don't talk to any clusters here because you wouldn't even know which cluster you should talk to, right? The mapping is one to many, so one profile can be 10 clusters. So you wouldn't know which cluster to choose.
So it's committing the previous result, or it's just trying for the previous commit, render it, and then the new commit, and render it and diff then.
So these diffs, they're not committed. They're just like, but from the state of the repo, you can always build out the customization. So you just check out the base branch, you build it out, and then like it would save time if we check them in. Then we could just do diffs on the existing files. It would be more tedious, where people would be like forced to update them in their PRs to keep them up to date, or there would be on every merge you have to get another commit which updated, something like that. So yeah, it's like a trade-off. Both would be possible. I think we're like moving into the QA stage. I don't have anything else. Yeah.
As I understood, you need to promote staging, then the production. So how easy will we do a hotfix on production?
Yeah, that's kind of the problematic part of the linear workflow, where what we end up doing now. Initially, we had the assumption that we would iterate very quickly, and it would basically always be the same. That ended up not happening. And what we have to do now is like we have to create a new custom branch with the production state, add the hotfix there, then temporarily redirect the clusters onto that hotfix branch. And it gets super messy. It gets super messy all over. And so that's like the main reason why we are switching away from the linear fast forward model. Yeah, like this is a huge rabbit hole for me where I could like spend an hour talking about these like problems with the branches and like why have this, why not have this. In one sentence, I nowadays strongly advocate for like fully trunk based, where you handle everything on the customization level, because that's how customization is built and like the philosophy of it.
Regarding customization, there are resources defined in the YAML file, and multiple resources there. Right? So if one fails some reason, then how the customization will?
Right. Like on the clusters, I guess only for local people. Like they have some kind of dependency there. So apps is dependent on infrastructure. Like apps will not progress if infra is broken. And that's kind of by design. But also, if something random in infra is breaking, the other stuff might not get reconciled. But I mean, if something is broken, we just need to go and fix it anyway. Like, we don't do partial success. We don't. Yeah, like you could have more granularity in these customizations. You could like separate non-critical stuff into some site customization, just like observability. We don't care about that. Just have a separate one that's like not a dependency for anything. Yeah.
I have a question. So you mentioned you are going to move towards trunk-based development.
Mhm.
So how you want to handle the benefits of branching strategies?
Yeah.
You know, like how you want to make sure that the promotion to production will be like all right. You know.
Yeah. So I think you have like, if you want no separation, I think the only way you can achieve it is actually by separating the repos.
Yeah.
And yeah, otherwise, I would actually argue that even with you can actually achieve a similar level of confidence with the trunk-based model if your tooling is mature enough. Like, the diffs are a pretty primitive thing, but you can have a check that says, if you've generated a diff into production, then whatever, you have to have some special criteria passed. And then you can, for example, require like no live person, no human can modify the staging layer, and you can have like tooling which is only allowed to promote between the stages, and that's the only criteria that like accepts changes into those environments. And you do it more on the level of like PR gates and checks instead of relying on the branches to do RBAC for you.
I mean, me personally, I also prefer this trunk-based development.
Yeah.
Even for this development, I still believe there are much more benefits
Yeah.
than like this grid.
Yeah, I think like the real thing I haven't got like a good answer for is like the RBAC. Like, like just people have the ability to kind of commit and potentially modify production, which we have to solve by separate repos. But everything else, I think, is like an illusion of the branches, where like even for example let's say the idea that you are not bringing unwanted changes into an environment. Like when you start merging stuff, it can get a bit messy, and you sometimes do some merge resolutions which don't do what you intended. And also a problem if you don't have the linear history, but you allow like free form branches, is that you might put some modification into that branch, and then it never conflicts with anything else ever. And you have that change in there, but there's nothing like forcing you to take it away. And you have like permanent drift in that environment that you're not like really aware of anymore.
I mean, at least Argo CD is actually really recommending to go with this trunk-based development because,
I think that's like, I mean, the whole tool chain is kind of built around that, I think. So, all right. So I think we're good to go.
There's no question on Slido, so
thanks.